you see the stylish?
Welcome to the Young IPA Podcast. I'm James. This is Pete.
G'day, everyone.
8th of December. This is episode 197. I'm going to be doing like a, what was that? Was that you? Was that me?
That was a ding on my computer.
Well, there we go. Okay. Show's off the rails already. So it's going to be like, we're going to be talking to Gideon Rozner, a good friend of the show, reflecting on the end of the year, coming up to silly season, and, just what we learned, what we're looking forward to for next year. So that's going to be a really fun interview, a whole bunch of other stuff. We've got a lot of industrial relations talk, a lot of underpaid people working on farms, which has been a big news story this week. Vaccines coming out in the UK, big story. Pete, anything you're looking forward to?
Well, I'm looking forward to chatting with Gideon because the bloke has been on telly literally most days this year, and of course he's had the IPA With You podcast, so he's been front and centre throughout this whole thing. He had some very big predictions about this decade last year, at the end of last year, which have not got off to the strongest of starts, but I'm really interested to get his takes because he's a really interesting guy and it should be great. Also, my hero this week is an awesome one, so very excited about that.
Very cool. All right, so let's start off with this industrial relations stuff. This is basically the last week of Parliament's being devoted to this new bill, which is looking to, depending on which side of politics you subscribe to, it's either entrenching casual work or destroying the very nature of employee-employer relations. So, it's a bit controversial, I'd say, Pete. So why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, so this is the government's omnibus industrial relations bill, which means it's sort of just a variety of things that they're addressing before, as James points out, the year ends. Some of those changes are under changes that would apply to 12 awards in industries impacted by the pandemic. Part-time employees working at least 16 hours a week can agree to extra hours at their ordinary rate of pay. Previously, if employers wanted to give them extra hours, they had to pay them penalty rates or overtime. Criminal sanctions for just wage theft and deliberate and systematic wage theft of employees have been beefed up, or it's proposed that they'll be beefed up. And the government will also amend the Registered Organisations Act to allow for the disamalgamation, what a word that is, of unions. That's obviously aimed at the problems that the CFMEU are having, which is really, really interesting. If you want to learn more about infighting in unions, just Google CFMEU. Now, obviously, yeah, so this is the government is saying this is allowing more flexibility for employers, more opportunities for employees. The ACTU is saying together governments, employers and unions should set a target to halve the number of insecure jobs over the next decade. That was Sally McManus, the secretary of the ACTU. Now, James, the reason we talk about this stuff is it's a bit dry on the surface, let's be honest, industrial relations, but the reason this stuff matters is particularly for young people. Flexibility around hiring enables young people to work. And a lot of the things you would be hearing about the minimum wage and casual working and insecure work and the gig economy and all those things aren't true. Most people that are on a minimum wage don't stay on a minimum wage for very long. It's the first step on the economic ladder, if you will, James. And most people that are on the minimum wage aren't even poor. They're actually just kids from middle-class families and things like that. So the reason we cover this stuff is because of that. And I think that anything they can do at this time to make it easier for employers to hire people is a good thing. What do you think, mate?
Yeah, so unions have never loved casual work because basically casual work can undercut what union workers ask for things, especially, the famous case when Uber came out with taxis being undercut by the rates that Uber were charging. So I get that. And unions have really been using coronavirus to push, this is the dangers of casual work. I mean, look at these security guards that are also working these other jobs. Look at these, basically we pointed the finger at one pizza delivery guy as the whole reason for South Australia to go into a lockdown. Like, I get why unions don't like casual work, but in a world where so many people have become unemployed in Australia because of coronavirus restrictions, and you're not seeing the job recoveries that you were expecting to when this idea of like, we can just freeze the economy, those jobs aren't coming back as quickly as you can. The idea that we need more restrictions on how people can get employed and more barriers for people to become employed, it's really bad. And casual work is going to make sure that a lot of people who have been working in hospitality and can't get those jobs back because some places have closed down, other retail places have closed down, that was casual work as well. Casual work is going to help these people get jobs back, get money back, and get people off of JobSeeker and JobKeeper, which are going to go away eventually. Look, I get that unions are there to protect their members, but the idea that casual work is going away scares me.
Oh, exactly right. And the unions
what
actually...
is that?
Do you know what? That's actually just a semi-trailer going past my house. So
Maybe
Grange
another
Road,
casual
Elkington.
worker. So that should be praised. That interruption to the podcast should be praised.
They actually had their regulations around when they could drive up and down this road lessened during the pandemic when everyone was lining up for toilet paper. So that's an interesting little side note. But the unions, like, it's open to question why the unions have so much influence in this debate and why they're engaged so much by the government. Obviously, you can see why the ALP does that. But the unions represent less than 10% of the private sector workforce. And clearly casual workers, you know, who don't earn that much and don't work that much are less likely to fork out to pay for a union membership. So there's a massive slice of self-interest in this from the unions in arguing for making it more difficult for the workforce to be casualised. Just a thing about the minimum wage that we've mentioned a few times, but just in case you've never heard it before, at the moment in Australia, the minimum wage is like $19.50. And then there's heaps of complications on top of that, but the basic rate is $19.50 or so. And the rate, if you're a single person with no dependents, the rate of welfare is, it's been beefed up, of course, but prior to the pandemic was about $7.50. So the fact that you couldn't say, you know, if you wanted to work $15 and someone wanted to hire you for $15, the government said, no, that's illegal. You have to go home and sit on the couch and only earn $7, of course, is a huge injustice. So I always think about that and I always try and tell that story as much as possible. And when you're having this debate over Christmas, at the Christmas barbecue, remember that story because that is, it's just a crazy situation. So with the fruit picking, James, which you mentioned earlier, so the McKell Institute, which is a Labor-aligned think tank, released the results of a 3-month investigation around blueberry jobs around Coffs Harbour. And because of the coronavirus lockdowns, thousands of backpackers flocked to the region. Now, there was reports of people getting paid $3 an hour. There was reports of people getting abused and harassed by labour hire companies because they were asking for their pay and things like that. There were people being put up in horrific conditions. So these jobs are jobs where you actually stay on the farm and being put up in horrific conditions, which were much worse than that were promised to them. We're obviously not talking about stuff like this. Like, these are obviously horror stories where people are reneging on their contracts. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about labour force deregulation. And the unions use horror stories like this, which are really bad and should be investigated, to justify a lot of the things we're talking about. What was your read on that, James?
Yeah, like you say, there are horror stories out there. I've had friends that have, travelled through Australia, gone to these fruit picking places and have heard some pretty terrible horror stories. And, you just hope that enough word gets out that no one signs up for those $2 places and they go out of business or at least have to rediscover what it is to run a farm. But yeah, this is the thing. If the casual work goes and if backpackers are no longer picking these fruits, then there are going to be things down the line. There are going to be other farms that can't survive, and there are going to be prices raised on goods that you think are really cheap, and it turns out they're actually not that cheap once unions get involved. So again, look, it's a time when we need to be thinking about how to get people employed, and not a time we need to be thinking about how to not make people employed, would be my very simple answer to where this debate is.
Exactly right, yeah. And when restrictions are brought in, the unemployment is sort of spread throughout the economy rather than the terrible things happening in one place, which always makes it a more difficult story to tell. Okay, James, let's get into the COVID-safe summer. So we saw in Victoria, the last restrictions for the year were lifted. I'll just run through a couple of them. 30 people over to your house at once. I know James especially has been making use of the reduced restrictions around Melbourne's nightlife over the last few weeks, which is great. Dance floors are back.
Guilty.
At dance floors are back at weddings. What else we got here? Public transit. Oh, so with masks, there's lower masks. The less you don't have to wear as mask as often. The private sector, 25% of their workers are on site, which will be moving up to 50% on the 11th of January in terms of offices. That will be less for the Victorian public sector. James, what did you make of these?
So here's the thing with restrictions. So it's hard to get fired up about these because you become so thankful that your life is becoming back to normal, and you're supposed to. You have to force yourself to remember that life should be normal in the first place. Like, it's not a return to normal that should be praised. It's normal should have been the benchmark the entire time. But the thing about this is Victoria is now 39 days since the last day of a community transmitted case. Now, if that's not the benchmark for higher caps than 30 and for, as you say, like caps on the amount of people that we can turn to the CBD, if we haven't hit that benchmark yet, when is the benchmark? Like, if 39 days... I didn't think elimination was possible. I'll say it. I did not think we'd ever get to a spot where we'd have 39 days without a case, but we have. But if we're not at the benchmark yet, I don't know when the benchmark is going to be hit. Like, when we're all vaccinated, like, is it seriously, like, not till December next year that we can really return back to normal? Because, again, that wasn't the agreement.
Yeah, I'd definitely say that's what it is. And I 100% agree with your point about everyone's like, oh, how good is this? It's like there's still a lot of regulations in place and everyone's like been through such a difficult period that they're just happy they can see their family and that they can do a few things and all that. But there are still a lot of restrictions in place. And as you say, 39 days in a row without anyone. I mean, any restriction you sort of have to think, why is that there? I'll mention a few of the other states now. Dancing will be allowed again. The ABC actually used the word deflaw in their report about this, James, which I feel to be a bit of a personal victory because I've been pushing the word deflaw for a long time now.
If it's with your taxpayers, it should be your lingo.
That's right. So, dancing are now allowed again at weddings, which is great news for lots of individuals out there. I actually heard during the week... Bad news from the bad guy from Footloose, but anyway. That's right. I actually heard during the week that Revolver in Melbourne was taking bookings. So Revolver's open, but you have to take bookings. I don't know who.
This is a notorious 24-hour nightclub here in Melbourne. So that's why Pete's eyes have lit up.
I'll have the 6 to 8 a.m. Anyway, WA, of course. Now let's get on to our Western Australia listeners. WA Premier Mark McGowan has announced people from New South Wales and Victoria will be able to enter the state without needing to quarantine from Tuesday. People from South Australia can visit again, but will have to quarantine, and that's from Thursday. So obviously Mark McGowan's spewing that he'll have to come up with a policy apart from we're going to close our doors to everyone forever.
Well, he knew it was popular, and I just go, like, the borders were never going to be closed down forever. It was the idea that the borders will just be closed until he wins the election, and then they'll open up again. But I think Mark McGowan's has found out when your opponent has a business card that he gave to John Howard saying, I'm the next Prime Minister, Mark McGowan just goes, you know what, I got this in the bag. There is literally no way I can lose this election. Let's just open the borders now. Like, I could oversee a second wave, and I'd still be the golden child.
That's his biggest threat. His biggest threat is becoming overly complacent, Mark McGowan.
No, I don't think that's his big... I think there is no threat. I think there is absolutely no threat. No, there's no level of complacency that can be reached that will be threatening to Mark McGowan at this point. Which is good news for Mark McGowan.
Do you know when the WA state election is?
It's either March or April next year.
That's Saturday, 13th of March. Isn't Google the wonderful thing? Yeah, I mean, that's not a very long period of time. So I think Mark's going to have a very happy Christmas. Anyway... Vaccines,
I also heard him say that state hard border closures can return, quote, in a heartbeat. So good luck to anyone that's booking anything in Western Australia for the next couple of months because you never know. Like, that's the thing with border closures. Like, if they can open up, great, but they can close at any time, and then you're absolutely left reeling. Well, yeah, I mean, it got paused. They had one of those pauses as a result of that person in New South Wales who got it. And just any rogue pizza boxes floating around that might be conveying an absolute super spreader version of the virus. I also saw this on Twitter last night. There's a bunch of people from New South Wales and Victoria that are currently doing the 14 days of isolation. Now, if you can now fly... If, like, Pete and I, after this podcast, you go, you know what would be really good? A few beers on the Perth Jetty... That is an option that is available to us right now. But if we left yesterday, we'd still have to do 13 days of hotel quarantine. So I think if they just get a negative test, they can get out, would be my thought. Yeah. Or at least be able to, what's it called? Quarantine at home. But yeah, like those people, there's people on Twitter going, so what, I've got to stay in here for 2 more weeks after. I wouldn't mind going to the Perth Jetty, James. That sounds like a great idea. I'm a little busy, but it was more of a hypothetical situation. It's a little close to home for me. All right, let's get into vaccines. James, the UK... Oh, you go. Oh, okay, well, let's go. So, UK have approved one of the vaccines that have come out. So, that's going to be making its way into the British public in the next couple of weeks. And it's ahead of Europe. It's ahead of the US. And it's very interesting. Now, Pete... I guess I'll start off, like, because you were saying off air that you think this is all a 5G tracking device. So I don't know if you want to start off there or talk about right to try legislation. I might go with option B, James. I might not get on that the 5G train. No, so as James mentioned, the BioNTech and Pfizer, don't know how to say that, immunisation will be available from next week in the UK. You don't know how to say Pfizer? Have you just not watched the news for the last 2 weeks?
I don't know what the P comes in. I don't trust the news people to say it right. Anyway, now, in the EU, right, so the UK have approved it, but it hasn't been approved in the EU yet because they have a stricter regulation around this stuff. There was a bit of a spat between the Brits and members of the EU because the Poms were saying they were very up and about it. Alok Sharma, the business secretary, said, in years to come, we'll remember this moment as the day the UK led humanity's charge against this disease. Now, Andreas Michaelis, Germany's ambassador to the UK, said, why is it so difficult to recognise this important step forward as a great international effort and success? So there was a bit of a spat there. And of course, the Poms have been able to do it quickly, more quickly than the EU. Now, some people have been claiming this is because of Brexit. It is not because of Brexit. There is legislation which allows countries to get out of the EU legislation regime around vaccines and medicines and things like that. But so any country in the EU could use that, but because of the political space created by Brexit, Britain have been able to make use of that. And to be honest, it's a great thing. It means that people in the UK will be able to get this thing earlier than people in the EU. And this really is a case of, to put a really fine point on it, massive regulation costing people their lives because people in the UK will be able to get it quicker than the people in the EU. And, you have to say that. You have to point that out because, proponents of massive regulation always talk about, lives saved and things like that. But that is what's going to happen here because the wheels of EU bureaucracy move that much slower than everywhere else.
Yeah, this is why I wanted to bring up right to try legislation, which, if you're new to this, it's basically the idea that if there are these drugs that are still in, held up in regulation or still in experimental phases, but you desperately need them in order to live, you can basically sign a waiver saying, I know what I'm getting into. Sorry, just got an email. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. This is the problem with push notifications. So that's what right to try legislation is. So this idea that UK have approved coronavirus vaccine, so members of the public that are like, look, I know the risks at this point. I know there are other legislations in which this is still being reviewed, but frankly, I'm exceptionally at risk, and I want to make sure that I'm still alive for when they are approved. That should be an option that's open to people. They should absolutely be able to take the drugs now. So I'm really glad that the UK are doing this, and I just hope that when European citizens or maybe US citizens seeing that the British are vaccinating themselves, they go, hang on, why isn't this the case in my country?
And that's, of course, one of the things that Mike Pence and the Trump administration in general expanded during their term in the US was right to try opportunities for people throughout the US. And of course, it's, if people, and that was more to do with people who are absolutely terminally ill. Like if people are really at the end and they haven't got any other options, of course they should be allowed to try experimental drugs. And if it works, that's great. And they're actually creating opportunities for people that are less sick. So once again, that would be a really good thing. And the barriers in place for creating vaccines and medicines and stuff are massive. Like in the US, for example, it takes I think $500 million in 10 years to get a medicine approved, and that just means that there's a lot of medicines out there that could be really helpful that just don't have the backing required. So yeah, great thing, and hopefully it gets expanded.
Very cool. All right, let's move on to heroes and villains. So we'll start off with heroes. As always, a Grunt the Pig Freedom Snort. So this is for people that have stood up for freedom and justice around the world this week. So Pete, tell us who gets the Grunt the Pig Freedom Snort for you.
Well, this one's a really good one. I mentioned at the top of the show I was very excited about my hero this week. Libertarian economist Walter E. Williams unfortunately passed away last week, but he was a wonderful economist and a wonderful libertarian advocate. He was born in 1936. He was an African-American guy from the segregated housing projects of Philadelphia. He faced massive racism and racist violence as a young person. He was drafted into the army, into pre-integration Georgia, which he didn't much care for, and he wrote to his boss, who at that time was the Commander-in-Chief, John F. Kennedy, about his thoughts on that. Now, he obviously went on to become an economist and a college professor, and his most famous works are 1982, The State Against Blacks, and 1989, South Africa's War Against Capitalism. And the important thing that Walter Williams did was he talked about the measures that are meant to help poor people, are meant to help people from racial minorities that are actually the state measures that actually ends up making things worse. Things like minimum wages, which were pricing people out of the labour market, public housing, which was terrible and push people into areas which just made things worse for them. Really poor education standards, welfareism, things like that. And that's really important at the moment because we're having this massive global discussion about disparities in outcome between people from different ethnic groups and different groups in society. And some of the reasons being put forward for that, I would, to probably undersell it, I find unpersuasive. But some of the things that Williams is talking about are really important and actually do have a genuine, practical, pragmatic impact on people's lives. And if we want to get serious about talking about this, we can't just, and like I fall into this as much as anyone else, we can't just talk about, unconscious bias is stupid. We actually have to come forward with some solutions about what we should do to end the disparities between different groups and societies. And Williams nailed that throughout his career. And he was, a bit of a firebrand, a bit of a contrarian. You all sort of have a bit of a soft spot for the outsiders here on the IPA podcast. So anyway, Walter E. Williams, check out his work, give it a Google. There's a lot of great stuff being written about him in the last week, and he's my hero this week.
Yeah, very cool. My one is this pretty heartbreaking video that came out of the US this week. So you had Angela Marsden, who runs a restaurant in Los Angeles, and she's making a tearful video about how her business is being closed down despite all the effort she's put into making sure that outdoor distancing guidelines can be followed. But now that California's also said that outdoor dining is also banned, she's basically lost everything. And she's posted a video, maybe a lot of people would have seen it already, but she's posting a video, she's walking around, and literally down the road, like in a car park near where she works, they've approved a movie studio to go ahead making a movie which has all the cafeteria tables laid out pretty much exactly as she'd laid out her restaurant. So she loses her business because she's a restaurant, but the movie can go ahead because I guess in California, if you're well connected and you're rich, you don't have to really follow coronavirus restrictions.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's like the two Australias. If you're big end of town, if you're public sector, if you're, got a public sector union behind you, the situation is obviously the same in the LA. And that was a heartbreaking video, so check it out if you haven't seen it yet.
A GoFundMe set up to support the restaurant has raised $90,000 so far. So big lesson out there, the internet doesn't always suck. Most of the time, it sucks. Sometimes it's awesome. Like Target Tory we had earlier on this year.
That's exactly right. All right,
This
James.
is my talking Gatorade for the people watching at home. I was like waving a Gatorade bottle, just like as I was making a point, like an angry dictator. This is my talking Gatorade.
You know he's serious when he's got his Gatorade in his head. Okay, so let's move on to the Extinction Rebellion fake nudie run villain of the week. Saul, run the tape for me, mate.
As Extinction Rebellion protests enter their 6th day.
There you go. That's the Extinction Rebellion fake nudie run for our villain of the week. James, who have you got this week, mate?
All right, I'm going to make this short because we've got an interview coming up. So this is like an incredibly fast-growing playpen I have of US politicians that have completely lost it. Started with Gavin Newsom saying indoor dining is banned as footage surfaced of him enjoying some indoor dining without masks. Last week, he had the mayor of Denver say don't travel for Thanksgiving, and then he traveled for Thanksgiving. This one is up there with all of them. So Austin Mayor Steve Adler has come under fire after he urged residents to stay home and curb the spread of coronavirus while he was vacationing with his family in Mexico. So makes a video saying don't travel, stop the spread, but he's doing it literally from his, like, what was it? Was it actually a timeshare in Cabo? But it was like, yeah, he's like holiday home in Mexico. Incredible scenes. Like how alienated from the world do you have to be? This is literally a Simpsons gag when Mayor Quimby gets a press conference, crashed. Just roll the tape because I'm not going to do it better than Simpsons.
People of Springfield, because of the epidemic, I have canceled my vacation to the Bahamas. I shall not leave the city. Hey, you, get that steel drum out of the mayor's office.
Sorry. Is there a prerequisite, Pete, in the US? To be elected, you have to have completely been isolated from the entire population of the world.
Well, there must be. It's actually incredible how many of these have happened, because once one or two happens, and they've happened in other parts of the world as well, you just think once one or two happens, everyone's like, all right, no mucking around now. I can no longer go to Cabo for this next 3 weeks. So, yeah, incredible stuff, James. And keep us up to date, because you are our correspondent in charge of American politicians being hypocritical with regards to COVID. So
it was the timeshare in Cabo. I've just reread the article, timeshare in Cabo. Incredible.
I'm glad you clarified that, James. All right, now my villain this week is, speaking of the swamp. Now, this is quite swampy. It's very closely related to swamp in every respect, because last Thursday was World Soils Day. And as a result of there being World Soils Day, it emerged that Australia has a national soils advocate called Penelope Wensley. Now, that the description of her role is a world first in terms of elevating soil health to a level of national significance. The position of advocate was established to raise awareness, James, of the vital role soils play and to provide strong leadership and advocacy. Now, I don't care if people want to talk about dirt on their own dime, but Penelope earns $1,000 a day for 60 days' work a year.
Whoa!
And there's an optional extension. This is dirt.
That was a curveball. That was a curveball. I thought this segment was going one way. It went a completely another direction.
Yeah, but there's an optional extension of up to 100 days per year if required. Now, we talked about Scott Cam being the $345,000 a year National Careers Ambassador, so not as much as that, but still pretty good.
Wait, did you say 100 days if required?
Extension of up to 100 days per year if required, yeah.
Who decides if it's required? Does she just get to go, you know what, there's more to be done here. There is not enough soil advocacy. Give me another 40K.
I need another 40 days to talk about dirt. Now, I obviously know soil is we've got a lot of rural listeners and soil is very important, but it's open to question whether we need a national soils advocate. Why is the coalition government, James, paying $60,000 a year for someone to talk about dirt that's not dirt cheap? Penelope Wensley, you're my villain of the week.
That physically hurt. That hurt me. That hurt me in 5 different locations of my body.
I actually underlined it on my thing.
Let's just go to Gideon. Okay, we're now welcome back onto the show. One of the best friends of the Young IPA podcast, IPA Policy Director Gideon Rozner. Welcome back.
Great to be here, boys, as always.
All right, so we're coming into silly season for 2020. News stories are starting to dry up a bit. So what we wanted to do with this one is do a big reflect on the year that's passed. I mean, biggest year of my life, at least, just from a news standpoint, from like where the world has been standpoint. So I don't know. We'll just kick it off. So I'm going to talk about one thing. We'll start close to home here with the IPA With You. This was your first podcast venture of your own. You were talking to people that were living life through coronavirus. Like, what were some of the things you were learning from that?
Well, look, as your viewers know, and as IPA members know, we oppose lockdowns basically from the beginning. We released a video with me in Bank Place saying we need to end the lockdown now on the 4th of April, which was a hugely controversial thing to do at the time. Now, I was the bloke fronting that, and I got torrents of abuse and all sorts of things from trolls on Twitter.
Sam Neill.
Sam Neill, the actor. He called me a clown in a suit and things like that. It's one thing when the Van Badams of the world have a go at you, but when it's like the bloke from Jurassic Park, I mean, it stings a little bit. But, nevertheless, that's my job. And, getting abuse on Twitter is almost a KPI in our line of work. What surprised me, or what pleasantly surprised me, was the volume of correspondence I got privately from people saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. We don't know what this means for us and our families and our businesses and our jobs. Nobody else is saying it. Thank you for, coming out like you did. Thank you to the IPA, which is great because that's what we do at the IPA. We say things that need to be said that other people aren't saying. So it was... as terrible as the lockdown was, it was, I guess I can say, touching that so many people resonated with the message. But that said, the stories were absolutely brutal. People moving into state because their business of 20 years had folded, people who didn't know whether they'd be able to make their mortgage payments, people who couldn't visit sick relatives, a paraplegic woman who literally wrote to me and said she had nothing to live for now that her few remaining daily outings were impossible. She just had carers coming in the morning to get her out of bed and in the evening to put her back into bed. So that was, a confronting sort of and tough part of doing the IPO with you because, as you guys know, the best content comes from being a little bit humorous, a little bit of a, gamble. Nobody downloads a podcast to listen to a pale imitation of the 7:30 report. So it was finding ways to, provide something that's interesting and a little bit irreverent and, dare I say, entertaining, but doing so against the backdrop of some really awful stories and and what is undoubtedly Australia's great economic war crime.
So we know here in Victoria we had the longest lockdown in the developed world, one of the most brutal ones.
Gold standard, apparently. The
gold standard. Were you surprised that something like that would happen here? And I guess, what did that tell you were you disappointed that so many people accepted it and that so many people went along with it? And what did that tell you about human nature and even the fragility of democracy in a place like Victoria that's always been democratic?
Well, I guess that's an answer in two parts. So firstly, am I surprised that it happened? Yes, I am. I've been suspicious of government coercion and the power of the state my entire adult life, in fact, going right back to when I was a teenager. But this is what happened in Melbourne and all over the Western world this year was like, I couldn't have written a dystopian novel worse than this. In fact, it was geared towards my personal worst fears. It was a dictatorship of big public health with cops with unlimited powers enforcing it and democracy being completely thrown out the window. Was I surprised that people accepted it? Yeah, look, I was. I guess the observation to make is that, Australians are good people. We are. We're some of the best, friendliest, most kind, open-hearted, smart people in the world. I think what the corona mania in Australia, the fact that these premiers recorded such high approval ratings after what they've done to us, I think that shows the power of fear. And what concerns me is that politicians know now that if they scare a population enough, they'll basically go along with anything that, the bureaucratic, managerialist, industrial complex recommends. So that's a challenge for all of us, every free citizen in Australia, but more to the point for the IPA, because I think we could be more important now than we've ever been in our 77, 78-year history.
Yeah, I wonder, if there's an alternative universe out there where instead of just saying for Victoria, stage 4 restrictions just for, the original one was like, okay, this is just 6 weeks. This is 6 weeks of stage 4, then it's back to normal. If we'd been told it's going to be 112 days, whether the public response was going to be different, because I just wonder if it's also like this. This like gambler's urge, like, okay, just another 2 weeks, I can do that. Okay, we did that, just another 2 weeks, just another 2 weeks. And suddenly you just you don't feel the same sort of power over you as the idea of no, it's 112 days. So I don't know, that's interesting to me. I'm also reading The Plague, Albert Camus, which I have no idea how he predicted what the reaction was going to be so clearly. But he talks about how when the whole fear of the magnitude of lockdown just takes over you, you just lower your eyes. You don't think about the next 6 months. You just think about, okay, how am I going to get through today? How am I going to get through today? And you don't really want to push back against the government after that, because all you're just trying to do is get to sundown.
No, that's interesting. I haven't read The Plague. I've read a few of Camus' other works, The Stranger, obviously, and The Myth of Sisyphus and things like that. But that will have to go on my summer reading list, I think, because it's very prescient. Another thing I'll recommend while I'm here, and I wrote an article about this for the IPA Review, is The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver. Now, Lionel Shriver is this fantastic anti-woke author, and it was the first thing of hers I'd read. And it tells a story about what happens to a sort of upper middle class American family when the US debt bomb finally detonates in the country and the world moves off the US dollar as a reserve currency. It was so hauntingly realistic that at times during the lockdown, with all the sort of trauma and chaos of that going on, I had trouble distinguishing the book from the reality that I was living in. And it tells a very, very prescient cautionary tale about debt. And that is another big, big risk that we have ahead of us, not just because we're heading towards having $1 trillion worth of debt as a country, which would make anybody wake up and take notice, but also because through this, there seems to be a bipartisan consensus on both sides of politics that the way to cure any economic ill is to borrow a whole lot of money, get the government printing presses into gear and splash it around in investment and stimulus. The economic debate in Australia has been heading in a very depressing direction for a very, very long time. Almost all economic debate seems to be focused around demand side economics, how to stimulate, how to create jobs, how to, I use this line a lot, but it's nevertheless true. It's almost as if, the governor of the Reserve Bank could recommend paying 500,000 people to dig a big hole and 500,000 people to fill it in again. That's the level of economic sophistication we have. We don't have the same kind of debate we had, frankly, when John Howard was in the Lodge, looking at ways to take the jackboot of government off the throat of private enterprise. We don't have governments making, in the main, ScoMo and Josh have come, have done their best and had a few ideas floating around, but we don't have the kind of courageous economic reform debate that we had, when I was a teenager and developing my first political interest. This is really, really frightening because I fear that we're on the verge, a few governments down the track, of having modern monetary theory becoming mainstream, this idiotic notion that you can just print as much money as you want because the government controls the currency. So as bad as all this is, we have to worry about restrictions to our liberties going forward under a whole lot of reasons, but we have to worry a lot about whether the Australian dollar will be worth the paper it's printed on. So I'm buying Bitcoin, and I'd recommend everybody to jump on now because major financial institutions are thinking along similar lines to me, and they're hoovering up as much Bitcoin as they can. So, and I have to stress, this is not financial advice. Consult your own tax agent, etc. I really think that this web of debt between nations, this never-ending money go around of paper currency that's not really backed by any underlying assets other than government fiat. I think that in our lifetimes it could collapse in a very, very big way. But I don't want to get to Alex Jones on everybody. We'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I've still got all my stuff from the original Bitcoin batch. But bringing back to coronavirus, I mean, this came out of this really interesting article in The Conversation about halfway through the year. I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically arguing that Australians have always seen themselves as the descendants of Ned Kelly, and I just don't think you can see yourself as that anymore with the level of, just faith that the government restrictions are going to always be right and the lack of pushback from anyone. I mean, yeah, for a country that said, okay, we're bushrangers, we're convicts, we're the larrikins,
we're frontiermen, mountain
exactly.
cattlemen.
Yeah, like Gallipoli's our favourite movie, and they're the ones that shoved it up the British lieutenants. It's just not the national characteristic anymore.
No, and it's hard to know why that is. It really is. I mean, a part of me says that maybe that was a bit of a myth, or that didn't start with the coronavirus. As far as I've always observed, there's a unfortunately large section of the community that likes rules, that likes being told what to do. That's why we have some of the most restrictive nanny state laws in the world. But I also think that that's not the real Australia. That's not our culture. We've been systematically weakened by big government for generations. We have come to depend on government for all manner of services and payments and supporting industries and so on. Now, some of that's the legitimate role of government to create a safety net for the most vulnerable, and some of it isn't. But what it's created is a big bureaucracy. It's created a lot of people whose livelihood depends on not just delivering those services, but spruiking the need for them. And unfortunately, we've seen a whole cottage industry of people who quite like these lockdowns because they kept their jobs no matter what. They're not subject to market forces. They never get sacked. They were quite happy to sit at home doing their job over Zoom in their jammies and posting things to Slack all day. As did I might add. I actually didn't mind the lockdowns too much. I had my bad days and good days. I missed going to the pub, but I had a job. I was lucky. What bummed me out was seeing what was happening to Melbourne and to the people in it. People, my dry cleaner, the bloke who works at the kebab shop, I get along with. The tears in the eyes of the owners of your favourite place, Bolt the Spleen, when I went through last night before the second lockdown came into effect. I just don't understand how people can either not notice the anguish that their fellow Australians are going through or not care. I guess that would probably be my biggest disappointment, that for all the talk of the left of compassion and everything else, there was no compassion for people whose lives are ruined by this thing. None.
You're exactly right. There was sort of, people are just sick of lockdown. That was sort of the take, people are sick of lockdown. It's like, no, they're not. They're not sick of lockdown. They're not bored of watching Netflix. They're in pain. Their whole life's been destroyed.
Exactly.
But the thing for me, Gideon, which I took out of this year was like that, we're sort of, our lives have been pretty good. Like it's just, I was just a sunny, liberal optimist. Things are going to get better forever. That's just the way it goes. But this year it's like, when you're sitting at home in like your fourth month of lockdown, you're like, you know what, this can get taken away from you. So, and to be honest, like politics has always been a bit of a spectator sport for me. Like it's something I'm interested in, but fortunately hasn't really affected me. Like that changed this year. Like it really did affect me. And
well, they say, when you don't take an interest in politics, politics takes an interest in you. And one thing that the left will have to deal with is that a lot of people who otherwise took a cursory interest in politics are fired up mainstream Australians, quiet Australians, battlers, whatever you want to call them, more than ever before, they have achieved what our opponents on the left like to call class consciousness. They know now that there is a divide between honest, hardworking people and the never-ending cavalcade of snake oil salesmen, grifters, carpetbaggers and two-bit spivs who subsist off the never-ending pot of money that's either stolen from people who work hard for it, or worse still, future generations. So that's going to be an interesting political cross-current. Look, I'll say this as well, because it's easy to get pessimistic. I'm still not pessimistic. I think that we are moving now into a new historical era. I think long after we're dead, there will be historians writing books about what the corona hysteria did to the world and how we acted afterwards. And we will be going through a new COVID normal. But this will not last. It will be transient. History tells us that you can suppress a free people for a while, but not forever. People have, the human spirit has overcome worse forms of authoritarianism than this. Look, it might not happen in our lifetimes even, but eventually this will self-correct. To paraphrase Barack Obama, the arc of history bends towards freedom, and we just need to be ready to go through some hard times and to really step up and make our case, because I think we may be on the verge of entering a new dark age, but it's just an age. It's not a permanent arrangement. It is not the downfall of Western civilization, and it is not the downfall of the human spirit.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not going to pretend that stage 4 wasn't tough for myself and a lot of other people out there, but it certainly wasn't 50 years of communist rule. So you just think about
well, correct.
Yeah, you think about how protective Eastern Europeans tend to be about individual liberties and how skeptical they are of big government. Like, that could be the same sort of awakening people have here. Like, okay, if you want to take my freedoms away, if you want to send me back into that, your arguments better be bloody good.
Yeah. Well, one of my favourite responses to the lockdown all year was recently when Stephen Marshall found COVID in the pizza box or something and shut down Adelaide for 2 days. And I posted on my Facebook page, that's facebook.com/the Full Rozner, and it's this bloke who was in Adelaide doing a vox pop, and he sounded like he was Hungarian or Czech or something, and I hope that Saul or Mitch can block me out with what I'm about to say, but he was asked, what do you think of the lockdown? And he said, you know what? This lockdown is the biggest bullshit in the universe. They prison us in our own homes for nothing. Well, he turned out to be pretty prescient, because 3 days later they realised that they made a mistake in some sort of modelling, and they had imprisoned South Australians for nothing. It goes to show my thesis, actually. Well, firstly, your thesis, Bolt, that people who've actually lived under authoritarianism know it when they see it. But secondly, that there is more wisdom in the average Australian person walking down the Rundle Mall than there is in all of our parliaments put together. And our job, I think, at the IPA and those of us in the Liberty Movement need to keep making the case for taking power and money and the force of coercion away from centralised government and the bureaucratic managerial elite, and giving it back to ordinary people, because as we know, as history tells us, that is the best and probably only way of ensuring human flourishing, strong societies, and happiness overall.
So, Gideon, I remember that clip. I absolutely loved it. I sent it to a few friends. It was just like, this fella definitely knows the score. He knows what he's looking at. Now, we talked a little bit about the future in general around the world. Now, obviously, a big part of what happens in the world is the United States. You're a Trump fan. I'm not going to. You said he predicted he would win 40 states.
I did even worse on social media. I put a map on the eve of the election with like New Mexico and Virginia and Colorado and all these states, thinking that he'd pick up maybe one of them, because Colorado
anyway,
I've gotten the Peter Van Onselen treatment since, and I probably deserve it. But yeah, look, it's not easy. I wrote an article for Penthouse, great publication, subscribe today, about the election result. I had to write it after, when the loss, I dealt very badly with the loss, I have to say. I've been around politics a long time. But as I said in the article, I really went through the 5 stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, eventually acceptance. But it was hard. And I think the reason why it was hard is because, we know, and I know there'll be people who watch this and think, he was vulgar, he was crass, the tweeting and everything else. The fact of the matter is we had somebody who was doing more for the cause of small government in his own inimitable, unique, and yes, sometimes ugly way than any leader we've seen in my lifetime, probably since Ronald Reagan. if we were able to get the landslide that I think Donald Trump was on track for, but for the coronavirus, then it would have dealt that fatal blow to wokeism, to big government, to the overbearing state, to the political and cultural elite the world over. That would have been the knockout blow. Because now Joe Biden has pulled a win away by hook or by crook, it would seem. That cause has obviously been set back. But the good news is that there are 70 million Americans who feel very disenfranchised, and they're not going anywhere. They're not going to forget the Trump years. They're going to, again, I make the point, class consciousness. Things will only change when people get active and demand their rights back. And I think in the US, and probably here as well eventually, people will.
So I know you just said you got burned from your last prediction, but let's just do one more. 2024, the Republican candidate is?
2024?
Yeah.
Okay, well, who I want, look, the talk of Trump coming back, obviously he deserves another go if he wants it. He'll be old. His star might have faded by then, but you can never rule Donald Trump out of anything. We can't even rule out him actually winning this election. I think it's extremely unlikely, but I can't tell the good news from the bad news over Twitter and everything else. I honestly don't know what's happening with all those
I think the
cases.
mandate's gone. Like, no one...
Look, I think he's gone. Anyway, 2024, look, Trump could run again, in which case, it's worth a shot. I would like to see somebody said to me a while ago that Tucker Carlson is the only person capable of carrying on the Trump legacy, and they're absolutely right. President Tucker would save the Western world and freedom and democracy. Who it could be, I don't know. Then you get down to the Nikki Haley's of the world, who I quite like and did a great job at speaking truth to power in the UN. I would hope that the Republican Party doesn't go back to boring schmoes like Jeb Bush and people like that. But it's the great test for the Republican Party. Can Trumpism survive without Trump in office? Will he be a figurehead for the party going forward? Will they blast him out? I don't know. We'll see.
Tucker 2024 for me. I reckon it's absolute shoo-in.
Who?
Tucker. I reckon 2024, absolute shoo-in. He'll be the nominee. Not saying like he's going to win, but we will be nominee.
Yeah.
I just reckon it's hard to go from being a TV host to being president. It's got to be.
That's a good one, Pete.
Who's done it? There was the bloke in Israel named Tommy LePete.
Oh, it's also Donald Trump, which is...
But he ran businesses and stuff. Reagan was obviously
but he was a TV star. He was a TV star.
Yeah,
Trump.
but
He's a TV star.
Oh, yeah, but what has Tucker Carlson done apart from being on TV? I'm speaking for ignorance here. He might have done all sorts of things.
No, he's been TV's basic whole professional career, but he's a TV star and he's got a lot of...
That was Donald Trump, I might add.
This is what I'm saying. The idea that a TV star can't do it has literally been proven wrong.
Yeah. A TV star did do it for 4 years and he did a bloody good job.
I just meant from a practical standpoint. Anyway, so Gideon,
yeah, mate.
I hate to dig up more dirt here, mate.
Oh, yeah.
But you proclaimed the 2020s were going to be the roaring 20s. This is this time last year. A period when we rejected woke politics and embraced liberalism. Now, what did you make of the explosion of woke authoritarianism that happened across the West in the wake of George Floyd's death? Is this a passing fad or is this something much worse?
No, it's a passing fad still. I do fundamentally believe that. Yeah, I've been thinking about writing a correction piece to the Roaring 20s piece. We try to be optimistic at the IPA. So at the start of the year, I said, the 20s are going to be different. We're going to move away from, people are going to start doing all the things I just outlined, demanding their rights back, demanding government relinquish its power and so on. I think that'll still happen, or it's still possible that it will happen. But in terms of wokeness, that is it's eating away at itself. Plenty of people who aren't from our political persuasion, far from it, are coming out against cancel culture now. A lot of people are saying, what do we need this for? What are we doing all this claptrap for? There are real problems to talk about. I think as more and more people get cancelled who are on the left, I think the emperor's clothes will come falling off. So I think wokeness will be something that... the other thing to remember about political correctness and all this, these fashionable causes, this performative, symbolic gestures and everything else, it's something sort of rich Western countries can engage in, but there ain't going to be too many rich Western countries for the next little while. So governments might have to start talking about things that actually matter, getting people into work, making sure people can get a home, making sure that our education system is actually equipping people with skills like reading and writing, not cluttering it with garbage dreamed up by postmodern eggheads in our universities, things like that. So I think wokeism is on the way out. As for safetyism, as for the bizarre love of someone like Brett Sutton, who brought nothing but pain, misery, and inconvenience to us all, I think that we're stuck with for a little while. But again, people will get sick of it eventually.
Well, I will point out, Spanish flu was also there in 1920, so the allegory isn't dead yet. The 2020s have a long way to go. You might still
9 years to go.
That's true. Maybe people will realise, look, life is short. There could be a dangerous pandemic tomorrow. YOLO. People might resent, having 9.5% of their income hived off, for example, to glorified union slush funds, that is the compulsory superannuation racket. They might say, no, life's too short. I need that money now for a home for my family. Or I want to take control of my own investment portfolio. I don't trust the banks and unions to look after my money. Maybe that'll change. I don't know.
All right. Very cool. Gideon Rozner, thanks so much for your time.
Cheers, guys, and well done on a great year.
Okay, thank you to Gideon Rozner. A lot of fun on that one. Let's fly through some stories that made us laugh this week, Pete. If I could start off at the Chicago Teachers Union.
Get in there.
Yeah, so obviously schools, whether or not they should be open or closed in America right now, big talking point. Chicago Teachers Union wanted to get in on the action and cause a bit of a stir. Didn't backfire for them. So this is a now deleted tweet. The push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny. So if you think that kids need an education and if you think that schools should be open because children from disadvantaged backgrounds might not be able to get the same level of attention, same level of education standards if they were at school, you are a sexist, racist, and a misogynist. So bad luck out there.
That was actually put up there without any supporting documentation on a Sunday arvo. The social media person has just gone out on an absolute limb and has thought, well, if my bosses just say words without actually having to know or care what they mean, then I'm going to do it too. And they've got in all sorts of trouble. They've also been... you go, sorry, mate.
I was going to say, so the deleted tweet was then followed up with fair enough, complex issue, requires nuance, and much more discussion. More important, the people that the decision affects deserve more, so we'll continue to give them that. Appreciate the feedback of those truly in the struggle.
It's not a complex... It's not a complex issue.
It is a complex issue, but you can't really solve it in the push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, going back to school is clearly good for everyone and including people from disadvantaged backgrounds even more. And you're just saying words, Chicago Teachers Union. Now, this is exactly what Walter Williams was talking about. The things that are meant to help disadvantaged people end up hurting them more. And there was actually our mate James Lindsay, who is now our mate James, because he was on the show last week, tweeted out an image of that, and then the image next to it of MSNBC, who are also massively woke, I would point out. And they wrote, when COVID-19 closed schools, Black, Hispanic and poor kids took the biggest hit in math, reading. So it's racist to send kids back to school and it's racist to not send kids back to school. So bit of a faux pas from the Chicago Teachers Union.
All right. Speaking similar areas, so this report came out of the Telegraph. Students at the University of Manchester want the word black to be banned from lectures and textbooks and claims it symbolises negative situations. This includes the word black sheep to be removed from lecture slides and books, black male and black market. This is the 21st century approach to race, which is I need to see race literally everywhere it is. That's the modern... How to be anti-racist is to only think in terms of race. Yeah, to make everything about race. And they had in some report I read, they had a linguistic experts in there who pointed out that actually none of those things were... It goes without saying, but none of those things... I didn't need a linguistic expert to tell me that.
Well, it always helps.
I just needed a local dictionary and an ability to just converse with others and read and interpret things to know that the word black male actually does not refer to black people at all.
That's exactly right. And the keyword here for me, James, is that undergraduates at the University of Manchester came up with this because it feels like something that was come up with on a Friday morning after a particularly heavy night out on a Thursday night with other undergraduates, and rather than deal with complex issues of race. Well, I mean, if this is talk first year, Thursday night.
I was a nerd at uni, so I don't
know
this world.
I wasn't making it to Friday morning lectures, but anyway, it would be like, just remove them all from this text. That's going to be our argument, and that's what we've come up with. All right, James, I want to talk to you about now. Christmas is coming up, mate. and I know that it's always hard to find people gifts, but here is something that you could really get involved with for the members of your family. This is a newsletter from the Greens. If you thought 2020 was a wash-up, you need a quick pack of legends to sort it out. This was an e-newsletter to Greens members. Our Richard D. Natali, get it, Legacy Tea Towel flew off the shelves in August, so we've expanded our range. Former Senators Bob Brown, Christine Milne and Scott Ludlam, all available in time for Christmas. $21. They've been marked down from $24 to $21. So for $21 only, you could get your parents, grandparents, friends a Bob Brown tea towel for Christmas. Don't miss it.
Is there a deal on bulk orders?
I don't know. There could be a deal on
Can you
bulk
get back
orders.
to me on that? All right, last one I want to talk about here is speaking of Simpsons references, South Africa wants to block out the sun. So this story is my favorite thing I've read. Basically, they want to come up with a way to protect local water supplies in Cape Town. And, you know, you can think about desalination. You can think about all these other things. And, so, you know what? Team researchers, they've thought, why don't we stir the pot a little? Why don't we really get some ideas flowing on this quiet day? And they want to block out the sun. Peter.
I'm on board with this. You know, we talk about, rather than restricting the whole economy to fight climate change, what we're going to do is come up with some man-made or human-made solutions to climate change. We're going to use our innovation, our technology, and I know this is a little bit outside the square, but blocking out the sun might be part of that. We've seen people talking about creating clouds so that it can rain, but apparently they're going to shoot dust particles into the air just to divert the sun, and if that's what they need to do...
So this is my problem with it, because, yeah, as you say, they want to dump vast quantities of gas into the atmosphere above Cape Town to preserve the local water supplies, block out the sun that way. You need the big metal disc. You need to go full Simpsons. You just need a giant tower, full metal disc, blocks out the sun, follows it across the sky, and then sets with it. None of this pumping gas stuff. I want the full metal disc or nothing.
I reckon, I mean, I'm no engineer or scientist at all, but I think the disc would be easier. Like putting dust.
It definitely wouldn't be easier.
Just get a crane. Just get a big crane and a big disc. That can't be too hard. Surely there's someone out there that can do that. So, I mean, Cape Town's a wonderful town.
I'm sure we've got engineer and scienticians who listen to the show. Scienticians. Yeah, that's the professional term from the Latin. Get in touch. Tell us which one would be easier. I think it's the gases by far. Anyway, that is it for the show this week. Thank you to Gideon Rozner. And thank you all for listening. If you like the show, make sure you're listening through Apple Podcasts. Make sure if you are listening through Apple Podcasts, you leave us a review. Tell more people about the show. We've also got Looking Forward, Viral Banter. We've got all these other podcasts that we're doing here at the IPA. But spread the word. And we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.